When I got engaged, my narcissistic mother and golden child sister demanded I cancel my wedding because it hurt my sister's feelings after her own failed marriage. They tried to gaslight and manipulate me, turning my happiness into their personal soap opera. When I refused and uninvited them, they tried to sabotage my wedding day. What they didn't know was that my fiancé and I are investigative journalists. For the final episode of our popular extramarital affairs podcast, we told an anonymous story of betrayal and family secrets that sounded suspiciously familiar. This is the story of how I stopped being the family scapegoat and turned their toxicity into a viral cautionary tale that left them with nothing. This is how I took back my life. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch. The call came on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are normally unremarkable, just a gray flannel day you have to get through to get to the rest of the week. I was at the sound mixing board in our home studio, a converted spare bedroom in our cozy bungalow in a quiet suburb of Austin, Texas. I was putting the finishing touches on the latest episode of our podcast. My fiancé, Ben, was sitting across from me, writing show notes. The air smelled of coffee and quiet contentment. This was my favorite place in the world. Then my phone rang and the caller ID read, "Mom." My mother, Sharon, isn't a just-to-chat kind of caller. Her calls are strategic, purposeful. They are almost always a prelude to a demand. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to sound breezy. Ben caught my eye and gave me a small, questioning look. "Hannah, darling," she began, her voice a little too sweet, like honey laced with something bitter. "And was just thinking about you and your little wedding." Little wedding. The first shot had been fired. Our wedding, planned for a beautiful winery in the hill country in 2 months, was anything but little. It was the culmination of 8 years of love and partnership with Ben, a man whose steadiness is the bedrock of my life. "It's going well," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "The invitations just went out last week." There was a long, dramatic sigh on the other end of the line. It was a sound I knew well. It was the overture to a guilt trip. "Well, that's what I was calling about. Your sister, Chloe, she's not doing well, Hannah, not well at all. My half-sister, Chloe, the golden child, the perpetually fragile princess of our fractured family. My mother had Chloe with her second husband, a man who had mercifully stayed out of my life. Chloe was 6 years younger than me, and she had spent her entire 26 years being the sun around which my mother orbited. Chloe gets a cold, and it's a medical crisis. I get a promotion, and it's a quiet nod. Chloe's latest drama was the implosion of her whirlwind marriage. She had married a charismatic grifter named Marco after knowing him for all of 4 months, a decision my mother had championed as romantic and spontaneous. Ben and I, who were both investigative journalists, had run a background check on him and found a trail of debt and broken hearts. We tried to warn them, presenting my mother with a dossier of facts. She had accused us of being jealous and negative. Predictably, the marriage had detonated 6 months later when Marco cleaned out their joint bank account and disappeared to Mexico. Chloe had been in a state of self-pity and collapse ever since. "So I'm sorry to hear she's still struggling," I said, though my sympathy was wearing thin. "Struggling doesn't even begin to cover it, Hannah," my mother said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Her heart is broken. The idea of a wedding, any wedding, is like a knife in her heart, which is why I need to ask you something. As a mother, I braced myself. "Ain't sure I think you need to postpone the wedding." Ain was silent, not out of shock really. With my mother and Chloe, the bar for absurdity was so low it was practically a tripping hazard. But the sheer, unadulterated audacity of it still managed to take my breath away. "Do you want me to cancel my wedding?" I repeated, my voice flat. "Because Chloe's marriage failed." "Postpone?" she corrected me sharply. Just for a year." "Give her time to heal. It's the sensitive thing to do. The right thing to do. To have this big, lavish celebration right now. It's like you're flaunting your happiness in her face. It's cruel." I looked over at Ben. His eyes had widened, and he was mouthing the words, "Are you kidding me?" I put the phone on speaker. "Mom," I said, trying to marshal every ounce of patience I possessed. "Ben and I have been engaged for a year. We've been planning this for months. We have vendors, deposits paid, guests flying in from all over the country. We can't just postpone it." "Oh, vendors' deposits," she scoffed, as if these were trivial inconveniences. "Money isn't the issue. The issue is family. The issue is your sister's fragile emotional state. If you truly loved her, you would understand. You would want to protect her from more pain." This was her favorite tactic, framing her outrageous demands as a test of my love, my compassion, my character. For years it had worked. I had spent my childhood and adolescence in a state of learned helplessness, constantly contorting myself to accommodate their needs, to avoid their disapproval. I was the responsible one, the easy one, the one who never made waves. Chloe was the one with feelings. I was the one with obligations. The cognitive dissonance of it all had been a constant hum in my brain. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally only seemed to love me when I was compliant. Their love was a transaction, and the price was my own needs. But I wasn't that compliant girl anymore. 8 years with Ben, a man who valued my voice and encouraged my strength, had changed me, and our podcast, The Varnish, had changed me. We specialized in long-form investigative stories about deception, con artists, corporate fraud, secret lives. We spent our days peeling back layers of lies to get to the truth. And in doing so, I had learned to recognize the architecture of manipulation in my own life. "No, Mom," I said, and my voice was calm and clear. It was the voice I used when I was interviewing a particularly slippery subject. "And we are not postponing the wedding. It's not a reflection on Chloe. It has nothing to do with her. It's about me and Ben, and our life together." "I see," she said, her voice turning to ice. "Yeah, I see how it is. You've always been selfish, Hannah. Always putting yourself first. I just thought, for once, you might think of your family. The family that is asking me to throw away tens of thousands of dollars and disrupt the lives of 100 guests to cater to the feelings of a 26-year-old woman who made a bad decision," I countered. "That family?" "She didn't make a bad decision," my mother shrieked, the mask of maternal concern finally dropping to reveal the raw narcissism beneath. "She was a victim, and you are victimizing her all over again. If you go through with this, you will be doing it without my blessing. I will not come. And I will make sure everyone in the family knows exactly what kind of cruel, unfeeling daughter you are." She hung up. The silence in the studio was profound. Ben just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "Wow," he said finally. "That was next level. Welcome to my life," I said with a wry, humorless smile. I wish I could say that was the end of it. But it was only the beginning. My mother, true to her word, launched a full-scale psychological warfare campaign. She and Chloe worked in tandem, a two-woman wrecking crew aimed directly at my wedding. My mother began calling relatives, spinning a sob story about her poor, heartbroken Chloe and her cold, callous older sister. She painted me as a monster, a bridezilla so obsessed with her own perfect day that she was willing to trample on her family's grief. Chloe, meanwhile, took to social media. She didn't mention me by name, but she posted a series of vague, tear-stained selfies with captions like, "It's so hard when the people who are supposed to love you most are the source of your greatest pain. And trying to heal when you're surrounded by other people's perfect lives is a special kind of hell." It was a masterclass in passive-aggressive performance art. Then came the texts to me. Chloe would send me pictures of her and Marco from their short-lived marriage, with captions like, "We were so happy then. I wish I could go back." It was a clear, deliberate attempt to make me feel guilty, to center her own failed romance in the narrative of my upcoming one. The pressure campaign began to work. A few relatives, the more gullible ones, started calling me. My Aunt Carol told me I was creating a terrible rift in the family. A cousin texted, "Can't you just have a smaller wedding? It's not that big a deal." Every call, every text felt like a small paper cut. Individually, they were nothing. But cumulatively, I was bleeding. I started to second-guess myself. Was I being selfish? Was a party really worth all this drama? The old conditioning, the learned helplessness, was a powerful tide trying to pull me under. The breaking point came at my bridal shower. It was a lovely afternoon, hosted by my bridesmaids at a local restaurant. My mother and Chloe had, of course, declined to attend. But about halfway through the party, as I was opening gifts, a flower delivery arrived. It was a massive, funereal wreath of white lilies. The card attached read, "In loving memory of the family you've chosen to destroy. Hope your party is worth it." There was no signature, but I knew. The entire party fell silent. My friends stared at the wreath in horror, and in that moment something inside me didn't break. It hardened. The years of swallowing my anger, of making myself smaller to accommodate them, were over. This wasn't just a misguided attempt to protect Chloe's feelings anymore. This was a declaration of war. I took out my phone, took a picture of the wreath and the card, and sent it in a group text to my mother and Chloe. My message was simple: that you are both uninvited to the wedding. Do not contact me again. Then I blocked their numbers. It was a boundary, hard and clear and absolute. I felt a terrifying, exhilarating sense of freedom. When I got home that evening, Ben wrapped me in his arms. He had already heard what happened from my maid of honor. "I'm so sorry, Han," he said, his voice thick with anger on my behalf. "Don't be," I said, pulling back to look at him. My eyes were dry, my mind was sharp. They just gave me an idea, a really great idea. "What kind of idea?" he asked, looking wary. I smiled, a slow, dangerous smile he had never seen before. "And you know how we've been looking for a killer story for the season finale of the podcast?" Ben's eyes lit up with dawning comprehension. "Canna, you don't mean?" "Oh, I do," I said. "They want to make my wedding about them? Fine. Let's give them what they want. Let's tell a story, an anonymous story, of course. About a wedding, a golden child, a narcissistic mother, and a sister who's had enough. Let's turn our family drama into a case study on toxic family dynamics and air it to our 2 million listeners." They wanted to ruin my wedding. I was going to ruin their reputation. And I was going to do it using the one weapon they had never understood and always underestimated: my voice. The weeks leading up to the wedding became a strange, exhilarating double life. By day, Ben and I were the happy, soon-to-be married couple, finalizing seating charts and tasting cake samples. By night, we were investigative journalists, hunched over our sound equipment, crafting the most personal and explosive story of our careers. We called the series The Wedding Guest. It was a 3-part special for the season finale of The Varnish. We framed it as an anonymous submission, a story sent to us by a listener about her own family drama. This gave me the emotional distance I needed to narrate it, to speak about the bride, and the mother, and the sister, in the third person. It also gave us a layer of plausible deniability. The first episode, which we titled On the Golden Child's Grief, was a deep dive into the psychology of the dynamic between me and Chloe. I laid out the years of blatant favoritism, the quiet, consistent message that her feelings were paramount and mine were irrelevant. I used anonymized anecdotes from our childhood. The time she broke a family heirloom and I was punished for it. The way our mother would praise her for the bare minimum while holding me to impossible standards. I wove it all together with commentary from a psychologist we interviewed, an expert on narcissistic family systems. We released it 2 weeks before the wedding. The response was overwhelming. Our inbox was flooded with emails from listeners sharing their own stories of being the family scapegoat. The episode went viral in a way none of our previous work ever had. People were dissecting it on Reddit, on Twitter. The anonymity of it made it universal. Everyone saw their own family in it. Of course, my family saw themselves in it too. My Aunt Carol called me, her voice a mixture of awe and terror. "Hannah, that podcast, everyone is talking about it." "Is that?" "It's an anonymous story, Aunt Carol," I said sweetly. "It's amazing how many people have similar experiences, isn't it?" The silence from my mother and Chloe was deafening. They didn't call, they didn't text, they knew. And they knew there was nothing they could do. To lash out publicly would be to admit the story was about them, to confirm every ugly detail I had laid bare. I had trapped them in their own narrative. For the second episode, The Matriarch's Mandate, we focused on my mother. We explored her enabling behavior, her codependency, her use of guilt as a tool of control. And this is where we introduced our first piece of hard evidence. A few years ago, my mother, in a fit of rage after I'd refused to co-sign a loan for one of Chloe's failed business ventures, had left me a long, rambling voicemail. In it, she had explicitly said, "Chloe needs this, Hannah. She is the one who carries this family's name with pride. You have always been a disappointment. It is your duty to support her." I made clip of that voicemail, with her voice digitally altered, but the words clear as day. It was the smoking gun, the undeniable proof of the toxic hierarchy she enforced. The day that episode aired, all hell broke loose in their world. Friends of my mother started calling her, people who had only ever seen her poised, perfect public persona. They were hearing the ugly truth behind the mask. Her carefully constructed world of social grace and maternal martyrdom was beginning to crack. But the final blow, the story I had been waiting to tell, was reserved for the last episode. It was a secret I had been keeping for years, a piece of information I had stumbled upon while doing research for another story and had never known what to do with. Until now. The final episode was titled, The Father's Ghost. And it wasn't about Chloe's father. It was about mine. My father died in a car accident when I was 4 years old. My mother had always portrayed him as the great love of her life, a sainted figure whose tragic death had left her heartbroken and alone. It was the foundational myth of our family, the source of her eternal victimhood. The story she told was a lie. Ben and I had discovered, through public records and a series of deep-dive interviews, that at the time of his death, my father was in the process of divorcing my mother. He had filed the papers a week before the accident. He was leaving her because she was having an affair with a married man, a wealthy, prominent Austin businessman who, a few years later, would go on to be a major financial backer for my mother and her second husband's new business. The affair wasn't just a betrayal. It was the seed money for the comfortable life she had built, the life that allowed her to coddle Chloe and sideline me. Her entire story was a fraud. She wasn't the grieving widow. She was the adulterous wife whose husband had tried to escape her, only to be stopped by a tragic twist of fate. We had it all: the divorce filings, financial records linking her to the other man, an off-the-record interview with my father's divorce lawyer, now retired, who confirmed the whole story. We scheduled the final episode to drop on the morning of my wedding. It was my wedding gift to myself, the ultimate boundary, the final, unassailable truth. The day of the wedding was perfect, a bright, clear Texas morning. As I was getting my hair and makeup done, my phone buzzed. The episode had just gone live. I didn't check the numbers, the downloads, the comments. I didn't need to. I just smiled. Ben and I stood under a massive oak tree, surrounded by the people who truly loved and supported us, and said our vows. There was no drama, no protests, no funereal wreaths, just love and sunlight. During the reception, my Aunt Carol pulled me aside, her eyes wide. "It's your mother," she whispered, "and she's checked into a wellness retreat indefinitely. And Chloe, she's deleted all of her social media accounts. They're gone, vanished." I just nodded, a serene smile on my face. Later that evening, as Ben and I shared our first dance as husband and wife, he leaned in and whispered in my ear. I laughed, a real free, uncomplicated laugh. "And so," I whispered back, "what's the story for season 2? He spun me around, the lights of the winery twinkling around us. "Inside, I think," he said, smiling. "It's about a couple who lived happily ever after." And he was right. My mother and Chloe had tried to make me a character in their sad, bitter little drama. They wanted me to be the villain. They wanted my life to be a tragedy. But they forgot one thing: I was the one holding the microphone. And in the end, I was the one who got to tell the story. I'm going to show you how to tell the story. The weeks that followed the wedding felt like waking up from a long, feverish dream. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been the soundtrack to my life for as long as I could remember was just gone. The silence left by my mother and sister's absence wasn't empty, it was peaceful. It was the clean, quiet space I needed to finally, fully, become myself. The final episode of The Varnish, The Father's Ghost, had landed with the force of a tactical nuke. It was, by a massive margin, our most downloaded episode ever. The story was picked up by national news outlets, written about in magazines, and dissected in endless online forums. The anonymity we had so carefully constructed was shredded within hours. Everyone in our hometown, everyone in our extended family, everyone who had ever known the Archers knew exactly who the story was about. The fallout for my mother and Chloe was swift and total. My mother's carefully curated social standing evaporated overnight. The friends who had once admired her for her grace and resilience now saw her for what she was, a manipulative narcissist whose entire life was built on a foundation of lies. The wellness retreat was, as we later found out, a high-end psychiatric facility where she was being treated for a severe nervous breakdown. Her second husband, Chloe's father, a man who had always been more of a passive bystander than an active participant, was reportedly humiliated, and had started consulting with his own divorce lawyers. Chloe's fate was, in a way, more pathetic. Stripped of her mother's social and financial protection, she was left with nothing but her own unaddressed issues. Her performance of perpetual victimhood no longer had a captive audience. The relatives who had once coddled her now viewed her with a mixture of pity and contempt. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved into a small, dingy apartment and was working a retail job at the mall. A spectacular fall from grace for the girl who had always believed the world owed her a life of effortless comfort. I felt nothing about their downfall. No pity, no satisfaction, no schadenfreude. It was like watching a news report about a distant country. Their lives were no longer connected to mine. The trauma bond had been so completely severed that I felt a profound and liberating indifference. The real transformation was in my relationships with the rest of my family. The ones who had been on the fence, the ones who had been swayed by my mother's campaign, came to me, one by one, with apologies. "We were wrong, Hannah," my Aunt Carol said over coffee one afternoon, her eyes filled with genuine remorse. "We listened to her side because it was easier. We never stopped to think about what you were going through. I am so sorry." He accepted their apologies. I understood that they too had been victims of my mother's manipulation for years. The podcast hadn't just been my liberation, it had been theirs as well. It had given them the language and the permission to see the truth they had long been conditioned to ignore. Our family began to heal, reforming around a new center of gravity built on honesty and mutual respect, rather than fear and obligation. Ben and I settled into our new life as a married couple. Our podcast soared to new heights of popularity. We were offered a lucrative deal with a major network, which gave us the resources to hire a small team and pursue even more ambitious stories. We traveled, we worked, we built a life filled with shared passions and quiet joys. I finally understood what a true partnership felt like. It wasn't about one person's needs eclipsing the other's. It was about two whole people choosing to walk the same path, side by side. About a year after the wedding, I received a letter. It was forwarded from our old address. There was no return address, but I recognized the looping, overly dramatic handwriting immediately. It was from Chloe. I almost threw it away, but some part of me, the storyteller, was curious. I opened it. The letter was 12 pages long, a rambling, self-pitying screed that was a masterwork of non-apology. She wrote about how hard her life had been, how I had never understood her sensitive nature, how the podcast had unfairly ruined her reputation. She accused me of being jealous, of always needing to be the center of attention. But it was the last paragraph that was the most revealing. "So I know you think I hate you," she wrote, "but I don't. I just always wanted what you had, not the things, but the quiet. You were always so self-contained, so sure of yourself. You never seemed to need anyone. I hated you for that because I always needed everyone, especially Mom, and she always needed me to need her. You broke the circle, and now we're all just spinning apart." For the first time I felt a flicker of something for Chloe, not pity, but a kind of academic understanding. She was right. Our mother's narcissism required a source of validation, and Chloe had been cast in that role from birth. Her identity was so enmeshed with my mother's that she didn't know how to exist without her. My refusal to participate in their codependent drama wasn't just a rejection of them, it was a threat to Chloe's very sense of self. I hadn't destroyed her. I had simply held up a mirror, and she had shattered at the sight of her own reflection. I never replied to the letter. There was nothing to say. Our stories had diverged so completely that we no longer spoke the same language. A few years later, Ben and I were in our studio, mapping out the next season of The Varnish. Our life was full. Our work was meaningful. The ghosts of my past were just that. Ghosts. Fading echoes. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my Aunt Carol. It was a link to a news article. The headline read, "Disgraced socialite Sharon Mills sells Austin mansion, moves to undisclosed location." The article included a recent photo of my mother, taken from a distance. She looked smaller, diminished. The imperious mask was gone, replaced by the tired, vacant look of a queen in exile. Ben looked at me. "You okay?" he asked. I looked at the photo for a long moment. I felt no anger, no pain, just a quiet final sense of closure. I thought about the girl who used to shrink herself to fit into their world. The girl who believed their love was something she had to earn. And I thought about the woman she had become. A woman with a voice, a partner, a life of her own making. "I'm great," I said, and I meant it. Now, about that story on the Miami real estate fraud, I think I have an angle. I turned back to the mixing board, to the work I loved, to the life I had chosen. The past was a story I had already told, and I was ready to start a new one.